She had not been invited. That was the first thing everyone at the Crawford family reunion noticed when Simone walked through the gate, and the second thing they noticed, the thing that made Aunt Phyllis drop her plastic cup of sweet tea and cousin Brianna forget the sentence she was midway through, was the man walking beside her. He was Korean, tall in the way that made space rearrange itself around him, and he moved through the crowded backyard with the specific unhurried calm of someone who had never once in his adult life needed to announce himself. His dark suit was not right for a July reunion in Augusta, Georgia. It was right for nothing that had ever happened in this backyard before. His eyes swept the gathering once, taking inventory the way a man takes inventory when he has learned that every room contains a threat, and then they returned to Simone. And something in the way he looked at her made 3 different women in that backyard understand without being told that this man would level a city block for the woman beside him. Welcome to Afro-Korean culture. Please like, share, and subscribe. Simone Crawford had not planned to come back. That was the truth she had been carrying for 2 years, folded small and pressed flat somewhere between her ribs, the kind of truth you learn to breathe around when you do not have the option of putting it down. The last time she had stood on this property, her Aunt Phyllis had announced to 14 family members that Simone's business had failed, that she was 31 and unmarried and had spent 5 years building something from nothing only to watch it collapse, and that this was what happened when a girl thought she was too good for a sensible plan. Her mother had said nothing. That silence was the part that stayed. She had rebuilt. It had taken everything she had and then some she did not have yet, but she had rebuilt, and what she had built the second time was different from the first. Smaller in some ways, quieter, but solid in the way that things are solid when they have been tested and survived, when they know exactly what they are made of. Her event consultancy now had 12 full-time staff and a client list that made other firms send her emails she did not answer. She had a condo in Atlanta with windows that led in the morning and a kitchen she had learned to cook in and plants she had not killed. She had, by every reasonable measure, won. But the reunion invitation had come in March with her grandmother's handwriting on the envelope, and Simone had stood at her kitchen counter holding it for a long time. Her grandmother was 82 and did not write letters anymore. She had made an exception. "Come home, baby," the card inside said, "just come home." She had not planned to bring anyone. That decision had not been made until 11 days before the reunion, in the parking structure of a hotel in downtown Atlanta, where she had been running final checks on a corporate gala and a man had stepped out of an elevator, and into her path in the rolling cart she had been pushing had hit his leg, and she had looked up ready to apologize, and had found herself looking directly into the face of Kwon Tae-sung. She had not known his name then. She had known his face because you did not work in high-end event planning in Atlanta for 5 years without learning to recognize certain faces, certain postures, certain qualities of stillness that meant something specific in a specific world. She had known he was Korean. She had known he was powerful. She had known that the 2 men flanking him at a respectful distance were not assistants. What she had not known, and what she had found out in the days that followed, was that Kwon Tae-sung's particular kind of power was the kind that did not appear in Forbes and did not get photographed at charity dinners, and had absolutely no interest in being understood by people outside its circle. What had happened in that parking structure was this. The cart had hit his leg, she had looked up, he had looked down at her. And for one moment that was too long to be accidental and too short for her to have fully processed. The entire world had done the thing it does when something is about to change, which is go very quiet. "Sorry," she had said, "I wasn't watching where I was going." He had looked at her for another beat, then at the cart, then back at her. "Is this your event?" She had told him yes. He had told her that the foundation hosting the gala was his. She had assumed he meant financially as a donor. She had found out later that he meant entirely as the man whose organization had created and funded it for the past 6 years without public attribution, because Kwon Tae-sung did not require credit. He required results. He had asked her to join him for coffee after the event. She had said she would be busy until midnight. He had said he would wait. She had assumed he was exaggerating. He had not been. That had been 11 days ago. In 11 days they had had coffee that lasted until 2 in the morning, 2 dinners, one long walk through Piedmont Park where he had listened to her talk for 40 minutes about the business and had asked questions that suggested he had been paying close attention to every word, and one phone call that had started at 10 at night and ended when her alarm went off at 6. He had not kissed her. He had not pushed anything. He had simply shown up every time she allowed him to, with the specific patient intensity of a man who has identified something he wants and has decided that wanting it carefully is the only acceptable approach. When the reunion came up, she had mentioned it the way you mention something you have been dreading, not looking for advice, just needing to say it out loud. He had listened. He had asked 3 questions about her family. She had answered all 3 with the compressed, managed brevity of someone describing a wound they have learned to keep clean. He had said, "Let me come with you." She had said, "You don't know what you're offering." He had said, "I know exactly what I'm offering, let me come with you." She had looked at him for a long time. Then she had said yes and spent the following 10 days alternating between relief and the specific terror of someone who has invited a very still, very controlled, very powerful man into the most uncontrolled space of her life. The drive from Atlanta to Augusta was an hour and 45 minutes, and T-Sung drove the way he did everything, without urgency and without waste. Simone sat in the passenger seat of the black car and looked at the Georgia highway going green around them and tried to organize her thoughts into something useful. "My family is loud," she said, "and they have opinions about everything." He nodded once. "My Aunt Phyllis specifically has decided that my entire life is a referendum on choices she disagrees with. She's going to have a lot to say about you." He glanced over. "What will she say?" Simone thought about it honestly, that you're not what she expected, that this is too fast, that I'm showing off, that something is wrong because things are going too well. "What is actually wrong?" he asked. His voice was quiet and entirely serious. "Nothing," she said, "that's what you'll find hardest to accept." He looked back at the road. "Then we will give her nothing to work with." She had almost laughed. That was not how Aunt Phyllis worked, and she would explain this later. But for a moment she had simply looked at his profile against the moving green of the highway and felt something that she did not yet have a name for settle somewhere in her chest like it belonged there. The Crawford family reunion was held every 2 years on the property her great-grandparents had owned in Augusta, a wide lot with old oak trees and a house that had been added to in sections across decades, each addition a different era's idea of improvement. By the time Simone and T-Sung arrived, there were easily 60 people spread across the yard and the porch and the kitchen, and the smell of everything her grandmother had ever cooked was coming through the screen door, and the sound of her family in full voice was the specific warm, overwhelming sound of belonging to something large. She stopped at the gate, just for a second. T-Sung stopped beside her. He did not say anything. He simply waited the way he had learned to wait, at exactly the right distance from whatever she was feeling. She opened the gate and went in. The silence that followed their entrance moved through the yard in a wave, not full silence. The music kept going. Somebody's nephew was still arguing about something on the far side of the yard, and her grandmother's kitchen radio was audible through the window. But a noticeable quiet rolled through the portion of the gathering that could see them, and heads turned, and conversations stopped mid-sentence, and Simone felt every single eye as a separate small weight. Her grandmother reached her first. This was the thing about Nana Crawford that had always made the rest of the family comprehensible, which was that she moved through noise directly toward what mattered, unhurried and entirely certain. She was 82 and small, and she walked with a cane she had been using for 4 years, and she put both hands on Simone's face and said, "There you are, baby." Like Simone had simply been delayed rather than absent for 2 years. Then she looked at T-Sung. Her dark eyes, which had seen an enormous amount and had made their peace with most of it, took him in with the specific calm assessment of a woman who had been reading people for 8 decades. "Nana, this is T-Sung," Simone said. "He's a friend," T-Sung said. He said it with the particular quality of someone who is offering the simplest version of a true thing. He looked at her grandmother with the same unhurried attention he gave everything, and then he bowed slightly with the natural ease of someone who has been doing this his entire life. "It is an honor to meet you." Her grandmother looked at him for a long moment, then she looked at Simone, then she said, "Come in the kitchen, both of you, I made things." The kitchen was the real headquarters of the Crawford family reunion, as it had always been. Nana Crawford presided over it with the calm authority of someone who has been feeding this family for 50 years, and finds the process both a calling and a pleasure. T-Sung sat at the kitchen table when she gestured, and ate what was put in front of him with the specific focused appreciation of someone who knows that food made with care deserves to be tasted carefully. He told her it was extraordinary. Her grandmother looked at him with slightly narrowed eyes, the way she looked at things she was deciding about. Then she said, "What do you do, young man?" And something about the directness of the question, delivered with Nana Crawford's specific authority, made Simone hold her breath. "I run several organizations," he said. "Import and logistics primarily, some investment work." Her grandmother said, "Are you good at it?" He said yes. She looked at him for another moment. Then she nodded once, the way she nodded when she had reached a conclusion, and went back to the stove. Simone let the breath out slowly. Outside was a different matter. Aunt Phyllis found them approximately 8 minutes after they emerged from the kitchen, which was faster than Simone had anticipated but not faster than she had feared. Phyllis Crawford was 63 years old and had been the family's chief authority on other people's lives for 30 of those years. She was not mean, exactly. Simone had spent years deciding this, and she stood by it. She was the specific kind of person who genuinely believed that her assessments were love, that saying the hard thing was the same as caring about someone, and that silence on any subject was its own kind of failure. Simone, she said, stopping in front of them with the deliberate pleasure of someone who has been waiting for this. Lord, look at you, you look good. Atlanta must be agreeing with you. Thank you, Aunt Phyllis. Phyllis's eyes moved to T-Sung. And who is this? This is T-Sung, my Aunt Phyllis. He extended his hand. It's nice to meet you. Phyllis shook it and held it a beat longer than was strictly necessary, looking at him with the unblinking attention she applied to everything she intended to evaluate. Korean, she said. Yes. And what is it you do? He told her, briefly and without elaboration. Phyllis made the sound she made when she was deciding whether to find something impressive or suspicious, which was a short hum that could go either direction. How long have you and Simone been seeing each other? She asked, looking back and forth between them as if the truth would only be visible in the gap between their answers. Simone opened her mouth, but T-Sung spoke first. Not long enough, he said simply, which was not an answer and was also entirely an answer. Simone looked at him, his expression had not changed. Phyllis made the sound again. She was going to have more questions. Everyone here was going to have more questions. But for this moment she simply nodded, and moved off toward another cluster of family, and Simone became aware that her cousin Marcus, 27, loud and possessed of the specific confidence of a man who has never been told no by anyone he found interesting, was making his way across the yard toward them with the particular walk of someone who wants to be noticed doing it. She felt rather than saw T-Sung register this. Marcus was, by all objective measures, attractive. He was tall and played college ball and knew exactly how to use a smile. He had also spent the last 3 family reunions finding ways to corner Simone in conversation to tell her, with the specific patronizing warmth of someone who believes he's being kind, that she was wasting herself, that she was too focused on her career, that she needed someone to take care of her. He had always said this while standing too close. Simone, he said, reaching them and directing his grin at her with the full force of someone who has not adjusted his approach in 3 years. You look incredible. What did Atlanta do to you? It gave me a good life, she said. Marcus, this is T-Sung. Marcus looked at him. The look lasted 1 beat longer than a comfortable introduction. Hey man, he said, with the particular carelessness of someone deciding in real time how much attention to pay. He nodded and looked back at Simone immediately. Seriously, you look amazing. I was just telling Devin you grown into yourself since last time. T-Sung said nothing. He was standing beside Simone with the specific quality of stillness that she had learned in 11 days meant he was paying complete and focused attention to what was happening and had made no decisions yet about what it required. You still doing that event planning thing? Marcus asked her. Consultancy, she said. Yes, it's doing well. Yeah, Marcus's smile stayed easy. You know my boy Jerome is looking for someone to do his company launch. I could put you in touch. Could be a good opportunity. She heard it the way she always heard it. The implication that her work was still something she needed opportunities for, that she was still the Simone who had failed and was climbing back, that he had access to something she needed, and this was a reason for proximity. She had heard this from Marcus in various forms for 3 years and had never fully understood how to address it without making a scene. She felt T-Sung's hand find the small of her back. It was a light touch, barely anything, but the message it carried arrived in the conversation like a change in weather. Marcus's grin stayed in place, but his eyes shifted. He looked at T-Sung properly for the first time. T-Sung met his eyes and said, Simone's firm books 2 years out. He said it the way he said things that were factually accurate and required no emphasis. But she is generous with referrals if the project is the right fit. He looked at Simone with the specific quiet warmth that she had been learning to receive. Who should he contact on your team? She looked at him for a half second, then back at Marcus. Email my assistant, she said. Her address is on the website. Marcus stood with the smile still in place but something gone out of it. The specific deflation of a man who has been gracefully and completely redirected by someone who did not raise their voice to do it. Yeah, sure, he said. He said it to Simone, but he was looking at T-Sung. He was going to figure out how to read what he had just encountered, and it was going to take him a while. He moved off toward the coolers. Simone became aware that her pulse was doing something it had not been doing 10 minutes ago. She did not look at T-Sung immediately. She looked at the yard, at her family distributed across the afternoon, at her grandmother's kitchen window where the light was warm and constant. Then she said quietly, "You didn't have to do that." He said equally quietly, "I know." She looked at him then. His expression was the calm, composed version of itself that she had come to understand meant he was containing something he had not yet decided to show her. She did not push. She was learning him the way she learned spaces, carefully and without rushing, understanding that some things revealed themselves only when you gave them room. By the time the food was served, Simone had been spoken to by 17 family members, and every conversation had involved a version of the same question, which was some variation of who is he and where did he come from and how long has this been going on and is this serious. She had answered each one with the same careful truth, which was that they were still figuring out exactly what it was but that it was real, and she was not in a position to say more than that right now. The one she had not anticipated was her cousin Deborah, 35, a social worker from Macon who found her at the dessert table and said quietly, "He watches you." Simone looked up from the sweet potato pie. "What?" Deborah nodded across the yard to where T-Sung was in conversation with her Uncle Raymond about something that appeared to involve sports statistics, which was not a subject she would have predicted T-Sung to have opinions about, and yet there he was, clearly engaged. "He watches you," Deborah said again, "every few minutes, just to check that you're okay, like it's something he does without thinking about it." Simone looked at him. At the precise moment she did, his eyes moved across the yard and found her, the way eyes do when someone has been peripherally tracking something they care about. He saw her looking. Something in his expression settled, like a small confirmation. Then he returned to the conversation with her uncle. Deborah said, "That's not a new thing, what I just described. Men don't watch women like that unless it's been building for a while." Simone said nothing. She cut her slice of pie and focused on the plate. Deborah said, "I'm not trying to get in your business. I'm just saying it's nice to see someone look at you like that." The afternoon moved into evening the way southern summer afternoons do, gradually and then all at once. The yard lights came on. Someone brought out a speaker and the music shifted to the kind of old R&B that made the older family members smile and sway. Children ran through the gathering, getting louder in the way children do when no one has told them to stop yet. Simone's grandmother sat in her chair on the porch like a small queen and received people who came to her, which was everyone. It was during this part of the evening that Aunt Phyllis returned. She came to where Simone and T-Sung were sitting at one of the picnic tables with Deborah and Simone's cousin Lena and Lena's husband, a quiet man named Paul who had the specific relief of someone who has been in this family for 12 years and learned that the best position was adjacent. Phyllis sat down across from them with the air of someone who has been thinking and has arrived at thoughts. "Simone," she said, "I want to ask you something and I want you to know I'm asking out of love." Simone had heard this opening before. She steadied herself. "Why didn't you come last reunion?" Phyllis said, not the version she usually said, which was accusatory and made room for the family to agree. This version was quieter, more direct. Simone looked at her. "Because last time I was here you told 14 people about my business failing before I was ready to talk about it myself." The table went quiet, even the music seemed to pause. Phyllis's expression shifted, a small movement, something moving behind it that might have been anything. "I was worried about you," Phyllis said. "I know," Simone said, "but worry that makes someone feel smaller isn't the same as love, Aunt Phyllis. It just feels like it from the inside." Nobody said anything for a moment. T-Sung beside her was still, the quality of stillness that meant he was present and not going to intervene and was prepared for anything. Phyllis looked at her for a long moment, then she looked at T-Sung. "You're in love with her," she said. It was not a question. T-Sung met her eyes without hesitation. "Yes," he said. The word arrived in the gathering with the weight of something that had not been planned. Simone felt it land. She did not look at him immediately. She felt the word the way you feel something that has been true for longer than it has been spoken, something that was already present before it had a name. Phyllis studied him. Her sharp eyes were doing the thing they did when they were deciding between two possible readings. Then she said, "You better mean that." "I mean everything I say," T-Sung said. He said it without performance, the way he said everything that was simply factually accurate. Phyllis nodded once, the specific nod of someone who has not finished forming an opinion but has decided to table it. She stood up and went back to the yard. Lena looked at Paul. Paul looked at his hands. Deborah pressed her lips together with the expression of someone who had been correct about something and was being dignified about it. Simone looked at T-Sung. He looked back at her. His expression was the open, quiet version, not apologetic, not explanatory, simply present. "You said it," she said softly.
Yes.
"You meant it."
Yes.
She held his gaze for another moment. Then she said, "We are going to have a conversation about that later." "I know," he said. He did not look worried about this. If anything, there was the specific quality of a man who had said a true thing and found that the relief of it was worth whatever came next. The evening continued. The family gathered and ate and talked, and the Georgia summer pressed warm and full against the yard. Simone moved through it differently than she had when she arrived. The weight she had carried up to that gate had not disappeared. Her aunt's words from 2 years ago did not disappear. But something had shifted in the carrying of it, some redistribution that had to do with the man who had said yes when she asked, and had shown up and had put his hand at her back at the exact right moment, and had told the truth in front of her family when she had not asked him to. It was late in the evening when the thing happened that changed everything. She was helping her grandmother carry dishes in from the yard, the specific last stage of a family gathering where the food is packed away and the older guests begin to settle and the whole event begins its slow, warm unwinding. T-Sung had been with her uncle and two of her male cousins, a conversation that had started with sports and migrated, based on the occasional phrase she caught, towards something involving business. She came out of the kitchen to find T-Sung standing at the edge of the yard, his back partially to the house, on his phone. His voice was low and in Korean, and she would not have been able to understand it even if she could hear it clearly, but she was close enough to catch the quality of it. The quality was different from his dinner voice and his conversation voice and his careful Atlantanite voice. It was the voice of a man who is not Kwon T-Sung of Atlanta corporate circles and evening walks through Piedmont Park. It was the voice of someone else, older and colder and entirely certain of something that had nothing to do with her world. He ended the call, he turned, and she was standing 10 feet behind him, and he saw her immediately. Something moved across his face. Not guilt, she thought, not quite, something more complex. The expression of a man who has been seen in a room he was not sure he wanted her to enter yet. She did not pretend she had not heard or had not noticed. She was not built for pretending. She looked at him and said quietly, "Do we need to talk?" He was quiet for a moment. Then he came to her, not away from her, toward her, which she filed in the place where she kept things that mattered. "Yes," he said, "we do." They walked to the far end of the yard where the old oak tree her grandfather had planted 40 years ago made a pocket of shadow and quiet away from the gathering. The music still played behind them and voices still carried, but here it was just them and the dark, warm Georgia evening. "Who are you talking to?" she asked. "One of my people," he said, "a situation I need to handle when we get back to Atlanta." "What kind of situation?" He looked at her with the full, direct version of his expression, the one that did not manage anything. "I told you I run import and logistics."
Yes.
"That's true, but it is not complete." She waited. "My family's organization has certain operations that exist outside of the spaces that are clean and visible. I have been working for years to restructure them, to move away from what my father built towards something different. But that transition takes time, and in the meantime there are elements that I manage which are not the kind of thing I could tell you over coffee without you deciding who I am before you had the chance to know me." She looked at him. She let the information settle. She was someone who had rebuilt a business from a specific kind of ruin, and she had learned in that process that the only useful response to new information was to receive it fully before deciding what to do with it. "Are you dangerous?" she said. "To people who threaten what's mine, yes. And to me." He held her gaze. "Never. That is not a thing I'm capable of." She believed him. She was not sure this was wisdom, but she believed him. She said, "I need you to tell me things, not everything at once. But I can't be standing in a yard with your other life happening 10 feet behind me without knowing it exists." "I know," he said, "that's why I'm telling you now." She looked at the tree, at the dark Georgia sky beyond it, at the warm lights of her family's house behind them. She thought about what Deborah had said. She thought about his hand at her back. She thought about the word he had said at the table in front of Aunt Phyllis, which had arrived in her chest like something finding the place it had been looking for. "This is complicated," she said.
Yes.
"I don't do complicated well." "You do it exactly well," he said, "you just haven't had someone to do it with you." She looked at him for a long moment. He looked back. The Georgia night was warm and full around them. She said, "Okay." He said, "Okay." She said, "But we are still having the other conversation later, about the thing you said at the table." "I know," he said, "I'm looking forward to it." She almost laughed. She did not. But she felt the thing in her chest settle further, deeper, into something that was beginning to feel less like finding and more like belonging. They went back to the gathering. The reunion continued its warm, inevitable unwinding. Nana Crawford watched them come back across the yard with the expression of a woman who has seen a great deal and is satisfied with what she is currently seeing. She did not say anything. She simply returned to her conversation with Simone's mother and accepted the glass of iced tea that someone handed her and let the evening be what it was. Simone's mother had not said much to her all day. This was not unusual. Her mother, Carolyn Crawford, was a woman of deep feeling and limited vocabulary for those feelings, and they had spent most of Simone's adult life circling the specific distance that comes from two people who love each other and do not know how to cross the space between what they feel and what they say. Her mother had not defended her 2 years ago when Phyllis made her announcement. She had also called every Sunday since, which was its own kind of language. It was near the end of the evening when most people were saying their goodbyes and the paper plates were piling up in the trash bags that her mother found her at the edge of the porch. They stood side by side looking out at the yard. "He seems good," her mother said, in the specific compressed way that Carolyn Crawford delivered things she had been thinking about for a while. "He is," Simone said. 2 more beats of quiet, then her mother said, "I should have said something 2 years ago, when Phyllis said what she said." Simone looked at her. "I was afraid of making it worse," her mother said. "I don't know if that's an explanation or an excuse, both maybe." Simone thought about it, both, she agreed. Her mother nodded, "That's fair," then she said, "I'm glad you came back." It was the most her mother had said in a single conversation in a year. Simone felt the familiar, complicated love of it, the love that was real and insufficient and real again. "Me too, Mama," she said. She meant it. T-Sung said his goodbyes with the ease of someone who understands that the way you leave a space is as important as how you entered it. He thanked her grandmother properly, using her full name with a formality that made Nana Crawford's expression do the thing it did when she was pleased. He shook her uncle's hand. He nodded to Phyllis, who looked at him with the careful eyes of a woman updating a position she had held for years. In the car going back to Atlanta, they drove in the specific comfortable silence of two people who have been through something together and are still inside it. After a while, T-Sung said, "Your grandmother wanted to know if I could get her a specific brand of Korean sesame oil that she had tried somewhere once and could not locate." Simone stared at him. "She talked to you about sesame oil?" For approximately 12 minutes he confirmed, "I have a source, I've already arranged it." She looked at his profile against the dark highway. "You know," she said slowly, "you are completely unpredictable." He glanced over. "Is that a problem?" "No," she said, "it's just going to take some getting used to." He looked back at the road. "I'm not going anywhere," he said. "You can take all the time you need." She rested her head back against the seat and looked at the highway going dark around them. The Georgia summer was still pressing warm against the windows. The reunion was behind them now with all its complicated weight and warmth. And whatever was ahead of them was still forming, still taking shape, but it was real. She was certain of it, in the way that real things announce themselves not with drama, but with this specific quiet certainty that settles in your body before it settles in your mind. She was not ready to say everything yet, but she was ready to go forward. She had not expected him to come to Atlanta with anything unresolved. That was the first thing she learned about Kwon Tae-sung in the week that followed the reunion. He did not leave things unresolved. He did not file things away under later and forget them there. When he said he would handle something, the handling had already begun before the words finished leaving his mouth. And when he said they needed to have a conversation, he meant he had been thinking about it every day since and was ready when she was. She was not ready. She told herself she needed a week to process. She had come back from Augusta with more than she left with, which was the specific weight of having done something true and survived it, and she needed to put it somewhere before she could look at it directly. She needed to go back to her office and her team and the comfortable, intelligent work of making other people's events extraordinary. She needed to water her plants and sleep in her own bed and be, for a few days, just Simone Crawford of Crawford Consulting, who had a good life and knew what she was doing. T-Sung let her have the week. He did not disappear. He texted, which was something she had learned about him early, that he was a disciplined and considered communicator, never excessive, always specific. He sent her a photograph on Tuesday of a view from a building she did not recognize and said only, "Thinking of you." He called on Wednesday evening for 11 minutes about nothing in particular, a conversation so ordinary and warm that it made her feel the specific pleasant disorientation of someone who has not been called just to be talked to in a long time. On Thursday he sent a small package to her office, which she opened with her assistant watching, and found inside a single white peony in a small glass vessel and a card that said, "For your desk. It belongs somewhere it can be looked at." Her assistant said, "Who is this man and is he a fictional character?" Simone put the peony on her desk and went back to work and tried very hard not to smile at the window for the rest of the afternoon. On Friday he asked if she was ready. She said yes, which was partially true. He said he would come to her, which she had not asked for and had not expected, and which landed the way things landed when someone pays attention to what you need before you articulate it. She had not said she wanted to be on her own ground for this conversation. She had not needed to. He came on a Friday evening with food from a restaurant she had mentioned once 3 weeks ago in the context of something else entirely. She had not expected him to remember. He had clearly written it down. They ate at her kitchen table with the Atlanta evening going warm and orange through her windows, and she thought about the last time she had eaten dinner with someone at this table, which had been 18 months ago, and about how different this felt, and about how the difference was not just him but also her, some version of herself that had arrived without announcement somewhere between the parking structure and the reunion, and a week of white peonies and 11-minute phone calls. After dinner she said, "You told my aunt you loved me." He looked at her across the table. "Yes. You said it like it was an established fact." "It is an established fact. We have known each other for 3 weeks." He was quiet for a moment, not in the way of someone collecting an excuse but in the way of someone deciding how to say something true accurately. "I have been thinking about you for longer than 3 weeks," he said. "The night we had coffee until 2 in the morning was not the beginning of it for me. It was the first time I was close enough to be certain." She looked at him, certain of what? That it was you specifically, that it had been moving toward you specifically. She held that, she turned it over, she said, "That's a significant thing to believe." "Yes," he said. "You're not someone who says things carelessly." "No. So when you say it, you mean it in a way that has weight to it, in a way that has considered what it means." He met her eyes, "In a way that understands exactly what I am asking you to receive and does not expect you to receive it all at once." She looked at the table, at her hands around her glass. She was someone who had rebuilt from rubble and had learned in the rebuilding that the things worth having were the things that survived examination. That love offered without being examined was just weather. That love that could be looked at directly, that could withstand being named, that was the kind worth making room for. She said, "I'm not there yet." He said, "I know." She said, "I am something, I don't have the word yet, but I am something and it's real and I need you to know that even though I can't match what you said." He said, "I know that too." She said, "How are you so calm about this?" He looked at her with the quiet directness that was entirely his. "Because knowing what I feel and knowing you're not ready to match it yet are two separate things and both can be true at the same time. I'm not asking you to catch up. I'm telling you where I am so you have the information." She thought about this for a long time. The Atlanta evening moved slowly past her windows, a siren somewhere far off, the particular sound of her neighborhood settling into Friday night. She said, "I want to know more about the other part, the part you told me in the yard." His expression did not change. "What do you want to know?" "Everything you're able to tell me right now, not everything that exists, just everything you're able to say tonight." He talked for a long time. She listened the way she listened when something mattered, which was without interruption and without the impulse to fill silence, and with the specific attention of someone who understands that what is not said is often as important as what is. He told her about his father, who had built the organization from a specific kind of desperation in a specific era, and had made it into something that had power and reach and consequences. He told her that he had inherited it at 26, which had not been his plan, and that the first 5 years had been the hardest thing he had done, because he was simultaneously learning to run something enormous, and trying to understand which parts of it he was willing to keep. He told her that the restructuring was real, Not a cover story, not a performance for her benefit, but a genuine years-long effort to move the organization toward operations that he could look at directly. He told her there were people who did not want him to succeed at this, who had interests in the old structure, who found his direction inconvenient. He told her the phone call she had overheard at the reunion was related to one of these people. She said, "Is it dangerous?" He said, "I manage it." She said, "That is not the same as answering the question." He said, "Yes, it has the potential to be dangerous. I am very careful. The people around me are very capable. I have not survived this long by being careless." She said, "And me, if someone wanted to get to you through me." He was quiet for one beat. The quality of the quiet told her he had already thought about this, had been thinking about it, had not brought it up because he was still determining what it meant for what was between them. He said, "That is something I think about. That is part of why I am telling you the full version, because you cannot make a real choice without the real information." She said, "And what choice am I making?" He said, "Whether to be with me, knowing what being with me means, not the coffee and the phone calls and the peonies, all of it." She looked at him for a long time. She thought about the 3 weeks and the parking structure and the peony on her desk. She thought about his hand at her back when Marcus had come across the yard with his easy smile and his easy assumptions. She thought about the word he had said in front of her family without flinching. She said, "I'm not running." He said, "I know." She said, "But I need you to promise me one thing." "Anything." "No lies, not ever, not even the kind that are meant to protect me. If something is happening that touches my life, I need to know it." He said, "I promise you that." She believed him the same way she had believed him in the yard at Augusta, with the specific quality of belief that comes not from innocence but from having been lied to before and having learned how truth feels by contrast. She said, "Okay." He said, "Okay." She said, "Now tell me about the sesame oil situation, because I need to understand how you had a 12-minute conversation with my 82-year-old grandmother about sesame oil." Something shifted in his expression. The controlled, composed version of himself found the edge of a smile and did not quite manage to contain it. "Your grandmother is formidable," he said. She wanted to know the origin region, the pressing method, and whether the producer had maintained quality over the last decade. Simone stared at him. "She also told me," he continued, "that you used to cry at the end of every summer because you did not want to go back to school, and that you once convinced your cousin to eat a whole raw onion on a dare, and that you have been afraid of commitment since a boy named David in your sophomore year of college told you that you were too much." She covered her face with both hands. "She talked to you for 12 minutes. She is efficient," he said. There was warmth in his voice that had not been there 30 minutes ago. "He has given you very much to contend with for someone who appears small." "You don't know the half of it," Simone said, and laughed, sudden and real, the kind of laugh that arrives without permission and fills whatever space it enters. And she heard it leave her, and she thought, "That is the thing, that is exactly the thing, this is what it feels like when something is right." She saw him hear it. She saw what happened to his expression when he heard it. He was not managing anything in that moment. He was just a man who had heard the laugh of someone he loved and was entirely undone by it. She lowered her hands from her face. He was looking at her. She said, "Not yet, but I'm getting there." He said, "I know." He said it like it was enough, like there was nowhere in the world he would rather be than in the specific middle of her getting there. The weeks that followed had the quality of something building. Not dramatically, not with the kind of urgency that burns hot and fast and leaves nothing behind. The quiet, committed quality of something being built to last, wall by wall, in good material, by someone who knows what they are doing and is not in a hurry to have it be anything other than what it is. They went to dinner twice a week. She went to his building once, a glass tower in Midtown that had his name on nothing visible and everything invisible, and she had sat in his office with its clean lines and its view of the Atlanta skyline and understood something about him that she had been assembling piece by piece. He was not someone who needed his name on things. He needed things to work. The name was irrelevant. The function was everything. She met 2 of his people. One was a woman named Jisoo who was 34 and had the specific composed competence of someone who has been operating in complicated territory for a long time and has made her peace with it. The other was a man named Choi who did not say much and whose eyes moved through rooms the same way T-Sung's did, measuring, filing, already 3 steps ahead. Both of them looked at Simone with the particular attention of people who are deciding something important about her, and she met both of their gazes without flinching, which she understood was the correct response. Jisoo told her afterward when Tae-sung had stepped out of the room for a moment that she had never seen him bring anyone to this office before. Simone said, "Is that significant?" Jisoo looked at her with the specific expression of someone who has decided to say a true thing directly. "He does not do things without reason," she said. "Everything he does is intentional, so yes." She met his grandmother on a Wednesday in September. She had not known this was the plan until they were in the car and he told her they were going to a house in Duluth where his grandmother had lived since coming to Atlanta 20 years ago. She had sat with the information for a moment and then said, "Should I have brought something?" He said, "I have something in the back." She twisted to look. There was a box. She turned back. "What's in it?" "Sesame oil," he said, "and 2 kinds of tea she likes and something my housekeeper made that she has been asking about." Simone looked at his profile. She thought about what Jisoo had said, everything intentional. She thought about the fact that he had clearly spoken to his grandmother about this visit before today. She thought about the box in the back seat that he had prepared. She said, "You've been planning this for a while." He said, "Yes." She said, "How long?" He considered. "Since the first dinner," he said. "I wanted to take my time about when." She looked at the highway. She thought about her grandmother and the sesame oil and the 12 minutes. She thought about the specific symmetry of it. 2 grandmothers, 2 kitchens, 2 sets of careful watching eyes. She said, "You know, for a man who says he's not rushing me, you have very long-term planning habits." He glanced over. "Those are different things." "How?" "Rushing means pushing you faster than you're ready to go. Planning means I know where I want to arrive and I'm not careless about getting there." She thought about this. She decided he was right. She decided she was going to stop being surprised by him being right and simply begin to expect it. His grandmother was 78 and had white hair and the specific quality of someone who was small and ancient and entirely unintimidated by anything the world had offered so far. Her name was Kwon Young-suk, and her English was limited but precise, each word chosen with the care of someone who uses only what is necessary and means every syllable. She looked at Simone from the doorway with dark eyes that were very similar to her grandson, in the specific way of something inherited. She said something in Korean. Tae-sung translated without being asked. She says, "You have a strong face, that she can see you have been through something and come out knowing your own worth, that this is not common." Simone said, "Please tell her thank you." He did. His grandmother listened and said something else. He was quiet for a moment. "What did she say?" Simone asked. He said, "She said she told me so." Simone looked at the old woman who had the expression of someone who has been correct about a thing for longer than anyone acknowledged and is finally receiving her due. She thought about what this meant, that this woman had told him so, that at some point in the last several weeks Tae-sung had spoken to his grandmother about her in terms that produced "told you so." She held the full weight of that. She looked at Tae-sung. He was looking back at her. His expression was the composed version, but underneath it was something that had no management available, something warm and entirely committed. She said nothing. She went inside with his grandmother and had tea and ate the thing his housekeeper had made and listened to Yongsuk Kwon speak, sometimes in English and sometimes in Korean with Tae-sung translating, about her life and soul before Atlanta, about the things she had left and the things she had carried, about the specific quality of love that she had found in this country which was different in form from what she had known at home, but identical in the thing that made it matter. At some point, the old woman took Simone's hand in both of hers and held it and did not say anything. Just held it. And Simone sat there in the afternoon light of the house in Duluth with this woman's small warm hands around hers and felt something arrive in her that she had been waiting on without quite knowing she was waiting. She knew what it was now. She was ready to name it. On the drive back to Atlanta she said, "I'm there." He glanced over. "You said you were telling me where you were so I had the information. I'm telling you where I am now so you have the information." He was quiet for a moment. The highway went by in the specific silence of someone receiving something they have been patient about for a long time. Then he said, "Say it." She said, "I love you." She said it the way she said things that she had decided, which was directly and without performance, looking at his profile against the moving Atlanta traffic. "I love you, and I'm not saying it to match what you said at the reunion. I'm saying it because it's true and I'm done waiting to be sure enough. I'm sure enough." He took the next exit ramp and pulled into a parking lot and put the car in park and turned to look at her fully. She looked back. He said, "I have been waiting a long time to hear that." I know, she said. He reached over and touched her face, just his hand along her jaw, the specific careful touch of someone who understands that this moment is delicate and means to honor it. She leaned into it. He kissed her. It was not a first kiss in the sense of being tentative or exploratory. It was the kiss of two people who have been building towards something for long enough that when it arrives it carries everything that went into the building of it. All the dinners and the phone calls and the peony on her desk and his grandmother's kitchen and the reunion yard and the dark Atlanta nights between then and now. It carried all of it. She felt it in her whole body. When they pulled back, he was looking at her with the full, open version of his expression, nothing managed, and she thought about what Deborah had said in the yard about the way he watched her, and she thought, I understand now, I understand exactly what she saw because I can feel it. She said, we should probably go back to my apartment.
He said yes.
She said, and we should talk about everything that comes next. He said, we have time. She said, I know, I'm not rushing, I just want to plan. He looked at her for a moment, something moved in his expression that was warm and entirely itself. Then he said, those are different things. She smiled. She knew. She was already beginning to know his vocabulary the way you learn the vocabulary of a place you are going to live in, the specific language of someone who means what they say and says what they mean and has been waiting for someone to receive it fully. They went back to Atlanta. The city moved around them, enormous and indifferent the way cities are, unaware that inside this specific car on this specific evening something had arrived at its full form. Something built carefully from a parking structure collision and 11 days and a reunion in Augusta and 12 minutes about sesame oil and a house in Duluth and the word she had finally said. The weeks that followed were different, not louder, not more dramatic. Simply fuller, the way a room is fuller when the right furniture has been placed, when the space has found its proportion and everything fits the way it was always going to fit once the right things arrived. He stayed at her apartment for the first time on a Tuesday, which was not a romantic occasion in any traditional sense. It was a Tuesday and he had been there late and the rain had started and she had said stay and he had. They had made breakfast in her kitchen the next morning, which was something she would think about later as its own small landmark. Just two people making coffee and navigating the same small kitchen with the ease of people who have already learned each other's movement. And she had thought, this is what it is, this is the version of it I could not have described before and can only describe now as exactly right. He told her more in pieces over time. Not everything at once, which she had not asked for, but steadily, the way the restructuring was going, the specific people who were its resistance, the careful architecture of the transition he was building. She listened and asked questions and did not pretend to understand a world she was still learning the edges of. She trusted him the way she had decided to trust him, which was not blindly but with the specific deliberate trust of someone who has examined a thing and found it solid. In November the danger arrived. She did not know it was coming. Nobody told her because nobody knew, because the man who sent it was skilled at being unknown until he wanted to be known, and he wanted to be known very specifically to T-Sung, and the way he chose to make himself known was through Simone. She was leaving her office on a Thursday evening, the last one out, her team gone home and the building quiet the way office buildings are quiet after hours, a particular institutional silence that is different from all other silences. She was thinking about the weekend, about plans she and T-Sung had made, about the fact that she needed to call her mother who had called twice this week and was working in Carolyn Crawford's specific compressed way, toward saying more things. She was thinking about all of this and not about the man who fell into step beside her in the parking garage. She noticed him because she always noticed people who entered her periphery in parking garages. She had learned this the way all women learn it. She looked at him and then forward and kept walking. He was a man she did not know. Mid-40s, Korean, suited with the quality of someone who took up space with intention. He said her name.
She stopped.
He said, Ms. Crawford, I'd like a moment of your time. He said it with the specific courtesy of someone who knows that courtesy at this moment is a performance and is performing it anyway. His English was perfect. She said, I don't know you.
No.
He said, but you know someone I know, he's why I'm here. She held her phone in her hand and kept her face entirely calm, which was a skill she had not known she had until this moment. She said, I think you should say whatever you're going to say very quickly. He looked at her with something that was not quite a threat and was not quite not a threat. The specific quality of power that is comfortable showing itself because it does not believe it can be stopped. I represent people who have concerns about the direction Kwon Tae-sung has been taking his organization. We want him to understand that these concerns are serious. He paused. We thought you might be the appropriate person to help him understand that. She said you thought you could get to him through me. He smiled, a small, precise smile. We thought it might be useful for you to have a conversation with him on our behalf. She looked at him. She thought about everything T-Sung had told her, about the people who did not want him to succeed at the restructuring, about the interests in the old structure. She thought about the promise she had asked him to make and that he had made, no lies, no protecting her from information that touched her life. She said you should leave now. He said, Ms. Crawford. She said, I'm going to call him right now and tell him exactly what you said and exactly who you are, or as much of that as I can give him from this conversation. So whatever you were hoping I would feel in this parking garage, afraid or pressured or inclined to deliver your message, I need you to know that I don't feel any of those things. I feel clear, and I'm going to call him now. She held his gaze, which was not easy, which was one of the harder things she had done. But she had rebuilt a business from rubble, and she had stood in her family's yard with 60 people watching, and she was Nana Crawford's granddaughter, and she was done being the avenue through which people accessed other people she loved. The man looked at her for a long moment. Then he stepped back. He said, give him our regards. He turned and walked away into the parking garage, his footsteps even, unhurried, the walk of someone who is not concerned about consequences and is going to let her think about why. She called T-Sung immediately. He answered on the second ring. He always answered quickly, which she had noted early and never said out loud. She told him everything, every word as precisely as she could reconstruct it. She did not manage it or compress it or protect him from any part of it. She gave him the full information, which was what she had asked him to do for her and intended to do for him. When she finished, the silence on his end was very brief. One beat, then he said, are you still in the garage?
Yes.
Go back inside the building, I'm coming. She said, T-Sung. He said, go back inside, Simone, please. She went back inside. She sat in the lobby of her office building and waited, and she was not afraid exactly, or not only afraid, she was also something else, something she identified after a moment as clear. She had done exactly what she should do. She had not flinched, and she had not delivered the message, and she had called him immediately. She had been exactly the person she intended to be. He was there in 22 minutes, which meant he had already been in a car when she called or had gotten into one before they finished talking. He came through the lobby door and went directly to her and looked at her the way he had looked at her in the parking structure on the first day, the complete focused inventory of someone who needs to verify that a specific thing is intact. She said, I'm fine. He sat down beside her. His jaw had the set of someone containing something large and managing it completely. He said, tell me again, everything. She told him again. He listened without interrupting. When she finished, he said, I know who he represents. I had been expecting movement from this direction. I did not expect it to come through you. She said, is this going to be a regular thing? No, he said, this was a message, a specific one. They wanted me to know they could reach you. She said, and what are you going to do? He said, I'm going to make sure it never happens again. She looked at him. She said, how? He said, by ending the specific problem at its source. The restructuring has been careful. There is a version of this that is faster and less careful, and I have been avoiding it because I preferred the careful version. I am revising that preference. She held this. She understood what it meant without needing the specifics. She said, will it be over? He said yes. She said, when? He looked at her with the full open expression. Weeks, he said, not months. I've been patient about this for reasons that no longer apply. She said, what changed your reasons? He looked at her. She understood. She was the reason, not that she had been threatened specifically, though that was part of it, but that she existed in his life and he had made a promise to her, and the calculus of patience had shifted the moment he had something real to protect. She said, okay. He said, okay. She said, I trust you. I asked for the truth and you gave it to me. I'm not going to make decisions about your world that you haven't asked me to make. You said weeks, I believe you. He looked at her for a long time. Then he reached over and took her hand and held it, his thumb moving once across her knuckles, and she felt the specific quality of someone who does not say thank you easily and is saying it in the only way available to him. She said, take me home, we'll figure out the rest later. He took her home. It was weeks, as he had said. She did not ask for updates she had not been offered, but he gave them briefly and factually the way he had promised. The situation moved. The resistance encountered its own resistance, which was Kwon Tae-sung moving without patience or caution for the first time in 5 years, and the specific quality of what he was when he moved that way was something she glimpsed at the edges and understood she was only seeing the surface of. By December, the specific problem was resolved in a way he described to her as permanent. She did not ask for elaboration, she believed him. In January, they went to Augusta again. This time there was no reunion. This time it was just her grandmother's kitchen table on a Sunday afternoon, the two of them and Nana Crawford and Carolyn Crawford, who had agreed to be there and who had spent the drive down based on what Simone could tell, composing herself for this. He brought sesame oil and the specific tea, and the thing his housekeeper made and also, which Simone had not known about, a small framed photograph that he placed on Nana Crawford's table. In it, 3 generations of the Crawford women, Nana and Carolyn and Simone, at a reunion 10 years ago, a photograph he had found in a box her grandmother had mentioned wanting to display and had not found the right frame for. He had found the frame. Nana Crawford looked at the photograph for a moment, then she looked at Tae-sung, then she said something brief and decisive in the way she said things when they were settled. What did she say? Simone asked, because her grandmother had been speaking directly to Tae-sung as if she knew he would understand her. She said he's family now, she's done deciding about it. Carolyn Crawford said nothing, but she looked at her daughter and then at the man beside her daughter, and her expression was the compressed, deep-feeling version of her mother's face, the one that said everything in the smallest possible vocabulary. She said, "He treats you well." "He does, Mama." "Then that's what matters," she said, "the rest is details." By February, Tae-sung's organization had filed its first fully clean regulatory disclosure, a milestone in the restructuring that Jisoo texted Simone about at 11 at night with 3 words that said everything: "It is done." She did not tell him she had received this message first. She simply made dinner for him that night, the spicy rice dish she had been learning, and told him she was proud of him, and watched the thing that happened to his expression when he heard it. He said, "You knew already." She said, "Jisoo told me." He said, "Jisoo never tells anyone anything." She said, "Jisoo and I have an understanding." He looked at her for a moment, then he said, "What kind of understanding?" She said, "The kind between 2 people who both want the same thing for the same person." He was quiet for a moment, then he said, "I have something I want to ask you." She looked up from the stove. He was standing at her kitchen counter with the specific quality of someone who has been holding something for a while and has decided now is the moment. He reached into his jacket pocket and placed a small box on the counter. She turned off the stove. He said, "I told your aunt I loved you before I told you. I want to make sure I'm doing this in the right order this time." She said, "You are." He said, "I have been moving toward you since a parking structure. I want to keep moving toward you. I want to wake up in your kitchen and know it's my kitchen too. I want your grandmother to make you eat things she knows you don't want to eat, and I want to be there when she does it. I want to take you to Seoul someday and show you where I grew up and find out what you think of it." He paused. "I want to stop being the man who comes for dinner and becomes the man who lives here if you'll have him." She said, "That was a very long way to ask me one question." He said, "I'm a thorough person." She laughed. She felt it leave her the same way it had left her that night at the kitchen table, sudden and real and filling the whole room. She saw his expression do the thing it did when he heard that laugh. She thought about Deborah saying he watches you. She thought about the white peony on her desk. She thought about his grandmother's hands around hers and the word "told you so." She thought about standing in a parking garage and not flinching. She thought about the long Augusta drive back to Atlanta with his hand in hers, and the highway going dark around them. She said yes. He opened the box. The ring was exactly right, which she would not have been able to tell him how to achieve, but he had achieved anyway, because he paid attention to things and he knew her, and because everything he did was intentional, and this was no different. He put it on her finger, she looked at it, she looked at him. She said, "We have to call Nana Crawford first." He said, "I already have her number ready." She stared at him. He said, "I am a thorough person." She said, "I am going to spend the rest of my life being surprised by you." He said, "I hope so." She called her grandmother. Nana Crawford answered on the second ring, which meant she had been waiting, which meant he had spoken to her already, which Simone decided she was going to ask about later and enjoy the answer immensely. Her grandmother said, "Took him long enough." Then she said, "Put him on." Simone handed Tae-sung the phone and watched him have a conversation with her 82-year-old grandmother that she could only partly follow, but that involved him saying "yes ma'am" twice and her grandmother laughing once, which was a sound Simone had not heard over a phone in years. He handed the phone back. Her grandmother said, "You picked a good one, baby, your grandfather would have liked him." Simone said, "I know, Nana." Her grandmother said, "The sesame oil is very good, by the way, tell him to bring 2 next time." She said she would. She hung up. She looked at Sung in her kitchen in the Atlanta evening with her ring on her finger and the rest of the dinner cooling on the stove and the rest of their lives arranged somewhere ahead of them, enormous and specific and entirely real. She said, "We should eat, everything is getting cold."
He said yes.
She said, "And then I want to talk about soul, you said someday I want to plan." He looked at her with everything, the full open version, nothing contained. He said, "Those are different things." She said, "I know, I'm learning." She had been learning him for months. She intended to spend a very long time continuing to learn in her kitchen and his and in Seoul and in Augusta and in every other space they would make theirs together. She intended to be learning him still when they were old, when they were the ones other people watched from across a room and couldn't fully name what they were seeing. She could wait for all of it. She had been patient long enough, but this was not waiting, this was arriving. This was home,